Now, Jonathan Ashworth, good morning to you. I know you've done some work on inflation, particularly food inflation, which now stands at 19.2%. There's been a spread in the Sun on Sunday today, a story calling it greedflation. Is there a sense to which the supermarkets are actually exploiting this crisis to take shoppers for a ride, do you think?
Well, families are really struggling. Of course, families are already paying more in tax under the Conservatives. They're paying more for their energy bills, and they're now paying more for their weekly shop, around £700 more a year, actually. And of course, the poorer families, people on universal credit who are in work, have already seen their universal credit cut by £20, and the failure to uprate it properly last year, are really, really struggling. People are really hard up. Look, one of the things that we're suggesting is that the energy costs are one of the drivers of inflation and food inflation for food manufacturing companies. Let's expand the windfall tax and use some of the proceeds of that windfall tax to support energy companies, I beg your pardon, to support energy intensive manufacturers, which is in the food sector, to bring bills down. You've also got to do things like deal with the labour supply problems as well, which is why I've put forward significant welfare reforms to get people back to work, to offer people an in-work guarantee by dealing with the traps in the benefit system. So there are measures that government could be taking to bring down food prices, but I'm afraid more broadly it's a symptom of 13 years of economic failure, and the Rishi Sunak's asking working families to pay the price for that.
You've talked about welfare there, but at the same time, Labour is associated with higher benefits. So how are you going to encourage more people into work if you're going to be paying them more money not to work?
Well, first of all, people should be given fair settlements in terms of their social security payments. Universal credit has been cut by £20, and then it was cut by, again, in real terms, because it was 7% less than inflation last year. But the reforms that I've been putting forward are about dealing with the traps in the system as it is. And I want to introduce, if you like, an in-work guarantee, whereas people who are out of work for reasons of sickness, but who say they want to work, are given a bridge into work. This is a significant reform, which would actually help a lot of people. It's been supported by experts. It's been supported by think tanks like the Centre for Social Justice. And I'm just really disappointed that government ministers are refusing to implement these types of welfare reforms when we know that many people want to work but are prevented from doing so at the moment.
Let's talk about somebody who has just lost their job, Dominicraab. Do you think he was a bully?
Well, look, it's right that ministers are demanding and pushing civil servants hard. I want to be the Work and Pensions Secretary. I will be demanding and push hard to get more people into work, to raise children out of poverty, to support families who are really struggling, to offer security for disabled people, 1 million more disabled people in poverty, to offer security for pensioners. It's right to be demanding when you're serving the British people. But the report said that he was aggressive and intimidating. But he wasn't just a bullying minister, he was a failing minister. Look at the backlog in the courts. Look at the problems in the criminal justice system. Indeed, failures in the criminal justice system are symptomatic of failures across all of our public services now, after 13 years of the Conservatives. And it's these failures, really, that anger my constituent. And I think it proves that you cannot trust the Conservatives with the future of this country, with the future of our public services, with the future. They cannot trust the Conservatives with tax and living standards. And I think that's the big issue in politics today.
Yeah. But I'm intrigued by your reaction to this low threshold that Dominicraab says has been set on bullying when you used to work very closely with Gordon Brown. Now, he was described by a former Labour Chancellor, Alistair Darling, as brutal and volcanic. In Andrew Rawnsley's book, The End of the Party, he noted that at one point the former Cabinet Secretary, Sir Gus O'Donnell, had a screaming match with Gordon where Gordon was, quotes, screaming and swearing at him. Gordon Brown had a very bad reputation for dealing with officials. Why wasn't he investigated, do you think, Mr Ashworth?
Well, I worked very closely with Gordon Brown, and Gordon is a robust personality, but he's not a bully, he did not intimidate officials, and we all worked very well with Gordon Brown. And of course, he was demanding and robust. And because he was demanding and robust, Gordon Brown was able to lift 1 million children out of poverty. He was able to give the NHS the biggest investment in its history, which led to the shortest waiting lines in history and the highest satisfaction ratings in history. And of course, Gordon Brown's robustness working on the international stage brought the G20 together to respond together to the global economic crash. So,
Right.
yes, he was a robust personality.
But doesn't this show...
But he was not a bully.
Doesn't this show, though, how subjective this issue is? I mean, you describe Gordon Brown as robust, other people describing as screaming and swearing, which isn't something that Dominic Raab was ever accused of. Furthermore, how can you support this idea that the civil service is impartial when Sue Gray has just been appointed as Keir Starmer's chief of staff?
Well, my experience of working in government, some time ago now, because we've had a Conservative government for 13 years, was that civil servants were impartial, independent, and incredibly professional, the ones I worked with. And indeed, the proof of that is that many of the senior civil servants I worked with went on to work in very senior roles for the Conservative government. And indeed, some of those civil servants ended up in political roles, working as politically appointed roles for the Conservative government. I don't see that as a point of criticism. I say that as a tribute to those individuals, because when they worked with me, they never indicated or showed any political bias, even if they were Conservatives. So, look, it's always right to look at reforms. By instinct, I am a public sector reformer. And it's always right that we look at how we improve institutions like the civil service. But this idea that there's some conspiracy and that Dominic Raab is the victim, and my gosh, I do think it is rather pathetic whining and whinging from Dominic Raab. The person who is responsible for Dominic Raab's downfall is Dominic Raab, and he should show a bit of contrition.